Welcome everyone to the Center for Science and Environment's initiative on the occasion of the World Antimicrobial Awareness Week 2020. The CSE is a not-for-profit public research and advocacy organization which is based out of New Delhi, India. I'm Rajeshwari Sinha from the Food Safety and Toxins team at CSE. And as part of this team, we have been working on the issue of antimicrobial resistance or AMR, particularly in the area of animal and the environmental aspects. This conversation that we're doing today is a part of the CSE's Act on AMR series, wherein we are engaging with global experts to know their thoughts on how to address this issue of AMR, in particularly antibiotic resistance, which is a rising public health threat today. Today, as part of the series, we're going to talk about new antibiotics and what are the challenges, concerns, and possibilities around it. And to tell us more today, we have with us Dr. Manika Balasegaram from the Global Antibiotic Research and Development Partnership. Dr. Balasegaram is the executive director of this partnership. By training, he is a medical doctor with an experience in clinical and public health practice in infectious diseases and also on international work in health policy and access to medicine areas. He is currently a board member of the Medicines Patent Pool as well as of the FIND Scientific Advisory Committee. He has also served on numerous technical and health policy panels, including notably as a member of the expert advisory group of the UN High-Level Panel on Access to Medicines during 2015-16, and also as a member of the WHO Scientific Advisory Group for the Blueprint on Research and Development Preparedness, which is ongoing as well as in 2015. Thank you very much, Dr. Balasegaram, for agreeing to do this with us and joining us. We extend a very warm welcome to you.
Hello, everybody. Nice to be here today.
Okay. So without wasting much time, let's quickly have initiate this interesting conversation that we plan to have today. And to begin with, Dr. Balasegaram, tell our viewers about this partnership, about the Global Antibiotic Research and Development Partnership, and also maybe if you could tell us what was the unmet need that led to development of this kind of a partnership.
Mm-hmm. So GARD-P, or the Global Antibiotic R&D Partnership, was actually conceived and I would say launched in 2016 in the World Health Assembly of WHO, the World Health Organization. And actually it came from the Global Action Plan on Antimicrobial Resistance, which was adopted by member states in 2015. And there was a specific pillar in the Global Action Plan about how to really promote and stimulate research and development for new tools. And so what WHO decided to do was, I would say, think about working with other organizations to accelerate antibiotic development and to actually then set up an organization that would be dedicated towards the development of new antibiotics. So we were actually, I would say, launched as a concept in 2016 with the aim of accelerating the development of new and improved treatments to address antimicrobial resistance. And the idea was that we would cover areas that were major gaps. To give you an example, pediatrics and neonatal medicine, so newborns and children who are specifically and actually significantly impacted by antimicrobial resistance, but where there's very, very little research and development focused at the moment. But also areas like sexually transmitted infections as well, where there are in fact very, very few, I would say, clinical candidate projects currently ongoing or were currently ongoing at the time to address this issue. In addition, the idea was that we would take a global health focus, including the needs of low middle income countries and emerging economies, and also ensure access and responsible use. So those were really the different areas that would be the focus of GARD-P, as we are called. And I think it was obviously very different to what other actors were doing and in a sense are doing today. Just to say, we were initially incubated within DNDi, the Drugs for Neglected Disease Initiative, which is another foundation focusing on drug development for neglected tropical diseases. And actually in 2019, we were set up as an independent legal entity. And I think over this time, we have set up projects and partnerships across the world and actually started and developed a pipeline of projects with our partners.
Okay. Okay, thank you for this, lovely introduction to GARDP. And I can tell you that we're going to have an interesting chat, knowing more about what you just said. For us to be able to understand what is happening on the front of, new antibiotic discovery, where we are, I think we're going to have a good chat around this. Moving on, part of it you've already, you've touched through in your first answer. But if I may ask, what do you think, given what GARDP is doing, what do you think, which are the diseases right now at this point of time, which is becoming more difficult to treat because of this resistant bacteria becoming resistant? I mean, if you could just help us highlight, what kind of bacteria is becoming, bothersome, not responding to antibiotics.
Well, as a starting point, WHO have actually developed a priority pathogen list for antimicrobial resistance. And they've highlighted 3 critical pathogens, which include, for instance, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, Acinetobacter baumannii, and a whole family of called Enterobacteriaceae. So this is a kind of starting point, I would say, but it doesn't give the full picture. But of course, I would say that these 3 critical pathogens are in fact a major problem. And I think, for instance, one particular one in the Enterobacteriaceae, the Klebsiella, is, I think, a growing problem across the world, including in countries like India. However, having said that, there are other pathogens that we are concerned of. For instance, Neisseria gonorrhea is one. And this is a particularly difficult one because this pathogen has effectively developed resistance to most known classes of antibiotics that have been used against it, and continues, in fact, to develop resistance to the current antibiotics that are used against it now. And so I think this is another area that I think will be a priority, because we now have near untreatable cases of Neisseria gonorrhea occurring around the world. To give you also another example, we can't just look at pathogens. As you said, we have to also look at diseases. Some people come in with problems. They don't come in with a pathogen as a presenting problem. And what we are concerned about, of course, is how will we be able to treat infections caused by these pathogens that could be, for instance, obviously, typically syndromes that present in a sexually transmitted infection clinic. But on the other hand, what we may see in hospitals in terms of difficult to treat cases like pneumonia or complicated urinary tract infections or intra-abdominal infections, even bloodstream infections that may happen. These may occur sometimes after medical procedures like surgery, or in fact, medical procedures like chemotherapy. And in fact, this is what makes antimicrobial resistance a very, very difficult challenge. You're talking about lots of different pathogens. You're talking about lots of different ways of how it can present, lots of different diseases or syndromes under lots of different kinds of context in a medical and public health setting. And then I would add on top of that, that we have to also look at specific populations. And to give you a very concrete example, neonates, newborns, and young children are a particular population in need. We see that there's a huge impact of drug-resistant infections in neonates, causing neonatal sepsis and, in fact, significant morbidity and mortality, so significant sickness and death. And a recent study had shown that around 200,000 to 300,000 babies are dying every year from these drug-resistant infections. And this is on a backdrop of an estimated 700,000 deaths a year. So you can see that this is just one population that represents a significant burden of disease. And this is not just in countries like India, for instance, where this has been well documented. This is happening around the world, including in Europe, where we see that neonates are probably one of the most impacted populations from antimicrobial resistance. And yet, very, very little research and development is happening in this population of young children and newborn babies. Now, there's a handful of trials, some of which have been conducted with the support of GARDP, that are being done, and that's it. And in fact, very few antibiotics, new antibiotics that are developed, are developed to the extent that they are then used in a significant way for this population. Often the pediatric or neonatal label is never really explored. There's never really an indication for use. And in fact, you then miss a big chunk of the population in need. So we do have to look at not just the pathogens, not just the diseases, but also what are the needs of specific populations. I've mentioned one, but there are other populations that one can think of. And I think the areas of maternal child health and care of the elderly, care of cancer patients, these are all things that are going to become major problems in the future.
Okay, so if I can take a cue from what you just elaborated, one is, or I may, if I may ask that the specific bacteria that you mentioned or the disease areas that you mentioned, of course, they are of prime concern. And if I understand correctly, the GARDP is also focusing on these right now, these areas right now.
Indeed, that's absolutely correct. I mean, this is exactly how we have developed our priority framework. We have looked at the WHO pathogens. We have also looked at populations in need, and we've also looked at specific diseases and syndrome. And through that, what GARDP has done has really developed its programmatic priorities. So we have developed 4 programs now. One is obviously focused on newborns and children. We've called this program Children's Antibiotic, and they really have this population of neonatal sepsis, but also, and this indication of neonatal sepsis, but also accelerating antibiotics for children, the pediatric population. We also have a program dedicated to sexually transmitted infections, and we've now also launched a program called serous bacterial infections. So these are all the hospital-associated infections caused by those 3 critical WHO priority pathogens. And of course, this means that we will be looking at indications such as complicated urinary tract infections, hospital-acquired pneumonias, and so on and so forth. There is a 4th program that is including doing asset evaluation, looking at what is there in the pipeline that could be interesting to feed into these 3 clinical programs. We also have a program that's dedicated on discovery and early exploratory work. And finally, we have a kind of project dedicated towards education and knowledge sharing, which is called Revive. And that is made up of a series of webinars, viewpoints. We have typically in the past, we've hosted events in medical conferences, and we have a pool of experts to support those involved in research and development across the world. Now, concretely, in our clinical programs, we actually have research and development programs. So, for instance, we have a phase 3 clinical trial. It's a pivotal trial for registration for a drug called zoliflodacin, which we're partnered with a small biotech company called Entasis. GARDP is actually the sponsor of this trial, so we have the responsibility to execute this trial across the world. We are also supporting another phase 3 program, which is being sponsored by a company called Venatorix. This is on a drug called cefepime taniborbactam. And this is actually really going to be developed for serous bacterial infections, starting with complicated UTI. But we obviously intend to go beyond that, and we also intend to develop that for children. And we've actually conducted and done studies on neonates. We did a study on evaluating dosing of an old drug called fosfomycin. And this study has been completed, and we're about to launch a study to look at how we can look at alternatives to the current standard of care now, which is really ampicillin gentamicin. Are there combinations of existing antibiotics, for instance, that we could use as alternatives? And also, we have just completed a very, very large observational study on newborns across the world. And so we have quite an active portfolio of work ongoing. There's more projects that I haven't mentioned that we will be starting in the near future. But we are building this pipeline up with partners. And the principle of how we work is as a public-private partnership. We are really pooling significant public resources, and we partner with private sector actors, with academia across the world. And we really are then committed towards engaging in these research and development programs with the aim of not just conducting research and publishing data, but to actually ensure that these treatments become available in a responsible way for people across the world.
Okay. Actually, I actually wanted to understand how is GARDP contributing to the new developments, new antibiotic developments. But I think you've explained it as part of this discussion. But if I want to understand globally, how does the drug pipeline look? I mean, it's always talked about that the last new antibiotics were about a couple of decades earlier. And no new antibiotics are there. So how does the pipeline look, and does it worry you, or are you hopeful with these kind of new initiatives that you are doing? A lot of things are happening. Where do we stand? Very briefly, if you could touch on that.
Yeah. I think what is good is we've started to look much more seriously, and this is particularly WHO been taking the lead on this. They've started to really look at the antibiotic pipeline and do regular landscaping and reviews of this pipeline. So we start to have a good understanding of what's out there and how this pipeline is evolving. And there's been a lot of new initiatives that have started, not just GARDP, but obviously, CARB-X is one that is supporting early stage research. There are others that are very active in the field. And so I would say the pipeline is getting better. However, we still see a relatively weak pipeline. If you just imagine the scale of the problem that I described earlier, all the different pathogens we have to cover, the different kind of clinical indications, different populations in need, and that this is a global problem, our pipeline is very, very weak. And the last WHO pipeline review, clinical review, so all of those candidates in clinical development phase 1, 2, 3, really showed that this pipeline doesn't have a lot of depth. And there are very few candidates that are actually targeting the critical pathogens on the WHO priority pathogen list. So I believe we're still in real trouble. And there's still a lot of work to do, and we have to take a long-term view towards addressing this problem. This is not going to be dealt with overnight or in 5 years. This is a generational issue and a long-term issue that we collectively have to deal with. It is not something that you can carve out. Antibiotics are an integral part of public health and human health, but also in animal health, as you alluded to right at the beginning. And we have to learn to not just develop new antibiotics, but to also better use the existing antibiotics we have today and better protect these antibiotics, while at the same time ensuring that people have access to treatments when they need it, when they are sick. Because more people are dying from lack of access to antibiotics today. But tomorrow we face a problem where people will die from lack of access, and people will die because the antibiotics we have are not as effective as they were before. And this is going to be a major problem.
Yeah. I think very rightly that you said it's not just about new antibiotics, but also preserving the ones. And very rightly so, this year's World Antimicrobial Awareness Week has this very theme of handling existing antimicrobials with care and being able to preserve those. So, and also what I gather is that we should be worried considering where we are and where this chronic pandemic is going. But how is GARDP different from any private drug development company? What is it that you do differently, and how do you work towards ensuring timely development of drugs and access to people? Affordability is also an issue. So what do you have to say on that?
Yeah, so first of all, we are not we're not here to compete with the private sector. Our role here is to enhance the work of both the public and private sector, and largely, in fact, by bringing them together and working together with actors across the field. This is extremely important. And what we do is we tend to focus, of course, most of our resources on late stage clinical development and access, and ensuring responsible access. And we work as a partner, a co-developer, and obviously also provide financing, bring in money as well. But all three of those aspects are extremely important. We're not just a simple funder that provides grants and say, okay, we'll check up on you and see how things go. We are a committed partner in the project, and we get involved. We are hands-on involved If necessary, we also take on responsibilities, including research and development and legal responsibilities, such as being sponsors of trials. We will ensure that we work closely with our partners to see the projects that we're working in reach key milestones, such as completing necessary trials and non-clinical studies, such as ensuring registration not just in high-income countries but also globally, such as also ensuring that there's continuity of work to ensure responsible and optimized access. What does this mean, for example? Well, to give you a concrete example, we also have to generate evidence to guide policies and guidelines. And I think this is very important because the data sets that many antibiotics have when they come onto the market, i.e. when they are registered in the FDA, is quite limited. And there's reasons why this is the case, but it does mean that we also have to continue development beyond phase 3 and beyond FDA registration or EMA registration to not just ensure global registration or global access, but also generating the evidence to guide use or to expand use in the appropriate way. And so this is another part of how GuardP intends to work and with partners. And a good example of that actually is the work we're doing on pediatrics and neonates. A lot of new antibiotics that come onto the market, the time of when they are developed for this population is extremely long. So we aim to accelerate the development for pediatric and neonatal population because these are the populations that need these antibiotics and they need them urgently. So that's just an example of the kind of work that we do. And I think that philosophy for us is that we're not just funding a trial and then that's the end of our involvement. It is much more as a committed partner with the actors that we work with. I would also add one other aspect is that we do take a strong global focus and we work closely with partners, not just, for instance, in the US or in Europe, but in other parts of the world, such as in sub-Saharan Africa. At the moment, we have been conducting activities, for instance, in South Africa and Kenya, and also in other priority geographic areas, India being a very important one for us, of course, where we've also conducted activities. So I think taking a global perspective and working in several different countries, including countries where there's a high need, is extremely important for us.
Yeah. Taking a cue from your expansion of work beyond the developed part of the world, and you just mentioned you're working in Kenya, South Africa, India. If I may ask, what is the message, or what is it that you would like to convey, or what is it that we need to do, particularly as public institutions or for the governments, to be able to address this issue of access of antimicrobials, which is, of course, there is a debate of access versus excess that's around. What is the message that you have?
Yeah, I think that we have to spend a lot more time unpicking this problem and better understanding what is the dynamics around this issue of access. But let me frame this in a different way. What is the point of developing new antibiotics and investing the hundreds of millions of dollars that are required if the populations that need them can't get access to it? I mean, what is the point? Why are we concerned about antimicrobial resistance and develop antibiotics if people can't use them anyway? It's just pointless. So from our perspective, the starting point has to be the end point. What is it we want to achieve? We want to achieve, and have effective antibiotics that are used responsibly, that can actually support and enhance medical care and healthcare.
Your sound, Dr. Manika.
The most, including for the most vulnerable populations in the world. And I think if you don't achieve this, everything else you do are just milestones along the way. But if you don't achieve this final outcome, then it's been a waste of resources. And we need to come back to this fundamental point. Now, what I think is very important is that COVID-19 has been a big eye-opener, because I think it's been a very good case example to show this is what happens when you have an infectious disease, which we have very few tools for, very few, as we say in the health security world, countermeasures for, medical countermeasures. When COVID-19 came on the scene, we didn't have any effective treatments, nor vaccines, or at the time, very limited diagnostics. Now we've obviously scaled all of that up. There's been a huge investment in research and development and so on and so forth. But we now understand that countermeasures are useless if people don't have access to them. If you don't scale up diagnostics, they don't have an impact. If you don't scale up treatments, they don't have an impact. If you don't scale up vaccines, you don't control the infection. And the same will apply to antimicrobial resistance, even though it's very different. It's not an acute situation like COVID-19. But here we're talking about a global pandemic. It's a slow burn. It's insidious, but it's happening and it's growing and it's across the world. And hundreds of thousands of people are already dying every year. And this is a problem that's getting worse and it's not getting better. And so if we want to develop new tools or countermeasures, they are only going to be useful if they are accessible to people who need them. And if they can have an impact in controlling, and addressing the problem that we're trying to deal with. So that's the principle of where we start. Now, if you look at the practical aspects, of what we need to do, let's accept that, if you look at the antibiotics that have come on the market in the last 25 years, only a handful of them have been registered in more than 10 countries or so. There's a publication that has been done on this. That's a pretty shocking number if you think about it, that most of these new antibiotics are just available in a handful of countries. And then I think if you look at another aspect, a lot of the time we develop antibiotics with little understanding of how these are eventually going to be used. So I think that is another aspect of ensuring that we have the right data and information to guide policies and use is critical. This is what stewardship is about, but stewardship has to be evidence-based. And I think the third part is to think about how we are, I would say, the dynamics of the antibiotic market. How can we address this? Are there practical things we've done in other areas, such as tuberculosis and HIV, where we've tried to address these issues of, say, global shortages or lack of access and so on? So what GARDP is doing is we are working with partners to try and develop an access framework that brings these three components together and look at interventions we can do, such as how can we enhance global registration? Secondly, what additional work do we need to do for some key antibiotics that can really guide policies and use and ensure not stewardship, but also ensure access and uptake? If we have guidelines, you can actually generate appropriate demand for antibiotics. But the third aspect we're also looking at is how can we, I would say, rationalize and support demand across countries or aggregate demand. This has been done very successfully in other areas of global health. Aggregating demand of antibiotics can really help with securing long-term supply. Similarly, with looking at mechanisms to support procurement. And this could be of new antibiotics, but also old critical antibiotics where we've seen supply shortages. So these are some practical elements that can be done and looked at. It can't be done by GARDP alone. It needs, I think, other actors across the world. It needs governments to engage and really take this on in a serious way. But what I'm trying to convey is that there's so much that has been done in the space of global health in other areas. We should be learning lessons and tailoring them and applying them to the space of antimicrobial resistance. Now, one final point that I would make is that I absolutely think that we have to preserve the One Health approach. This is absolutely critical because if we disconnect what we're doing, I think we will still somehow fail. So I think one thing we've done right is One Health and taking this One Health approach. And I think other areas will learn from AMR on this One Health approach. But I still think we have a long way to go to enhance this, and even organizations like GARDP, where we're still learning on how we can strengthen our own One Health approach.
Right. I think the last couple of points which you outlined very interesting and points which need to be, that each of them are points which can have independent discussions around them, and a lot of thinking can go into each of them that you outlined. One very last and a short question, maybe for our viewers, is that what is the gap that GARDP is filling? I know you've talked about partnerships, you've talked about monitoring and involvement in this entire process. But if in one line, what is that gap that GARDP is filling today?
Yeah, we are a dedicated partnership. We are a dedicated entity that focuses on late-stage development and access and antibiotic research. And we are here to help the global community really to accelerate the development and to deliver antibiotics to populations, especially populations in need. And I think the other point that I really would like to make is that we work in a different way. We're not a traditional funder or grant-making organization, so on. We are involved hands-on, and we are really looking at taking projects all the way to the end, beyond just the research and development, and trying to ensure global access. And we do this by developing bespoke partnerships. So every one of the partnerships we make for each of our different projects we have in our portfolio is different, and it's tailored to the context we're working with and to the partners we have to work with in the countries where we're working in. And that is very, very important, because there's no one-size-fits-all solutions here.
Yeah. Really nice having this conversation with you. In a brief time, we've got a lot of insights that can keep us thinking, and I really hope that these interesting nuances that have come out that usually is not countered, and our stakeholders who are watching this, viewers who are watching this, you get them thinking, you get them pondering around it, and some actions going forward. On behalf of CSE, I would really like to thank you, Dr. Palasegaram, for doing this with us once again. And very importantly, you've talked about 3 or 4 aspects, which, if I may just quickly capture. One is, of course, yes, AMR is a cause of concern from the One Health point of view, and we are running out on antibiotics. What you mentioned, it's not just about new ones, it's about also maintaining or keeping the ones which we have. Second, which I gathered is a very important idea of partnerships and collaborating. And taking the very beautiful line which you said is, you take things to the end, and what the focus is to first ensure what is needed at the end, and then work towards it. That is also something very interesting. The importance of evidence building, the importance of data, which can guide policy making and decision making is again another thing which I think is important. I just hope that this knowledge sharing that we have in this World Antibiotic Awareness Week, reaches masses, and people can reach out to you, to us, for more information around this. And we really thank you. We are grateful that we did this together. It's very interesting. And thank you very much, Dr. Palasegaram.
No, and thank you very much, and thank you for this invitation. It's been a pleasure talking to you.